Said, I started out as an occupational therapist, so I'm going to want you to actually use your motor skills and work with me as we use our book. So I have no PowerPoint. Sorry, no PowerPoint. What I need you to do is get your transition book out and turn to the handouts that are in your book from the mind. All right, while you're doing that, can you give me a little indication of how many of you are service providers to children with special needs? Okay, and I would assume the rest of you are parents. What other category do we have? All right. Well, it's any kind of service provider, in other words, all right? Okay, that's good to know. All right, are we all set with our handouts? Now, the transition book that you have there is from the California Department of Education. It's a very good resource, and I would encourage you to go on their website, California Department of Education, california.gov, cde.ca.gov, I think it is, and explore that website. There's a lot of good information there and some of these resources that you see in front of you. All right, let's start. We're going to talk about keeping your eye on the donut. So you're probably wondering, where did that come from? Well, my late husband grew up in New York City, and every time I got off track, he used to quote a poem that was on the wall of the New York City subway. As you travel through life, whatever be your goal, keep your eye upon the donut and not upon the hole. So I'm hoping that that will stick in your minds to remember what we're going to talk about today. Number one, let's talk about what that donut is. And I'm going to tell you that donut is the workplace. Absolutely the workplace. Because that's where these youngsters are headed. Whether they have serious disabilities and need some work skills to live on their own as much as possible. But most of the children in special education have IQs of 85 or above in the normal range. Do you believe that? That's quite an interesting statistic coming from the California Department of Education. So most of the youngsters in special ed can achieve work skills at some level. So let's take a look at our transition book to see where they tell us about the work success of youngsters. Let's look at the introduction. And that's page 4 and 5. IV and a little IV and a little V. And look at the information at the bottom of that page on IV. Most adults with disabilities are employed at approximately 1/3 the rate of the average population. Now I'm going to ask you questions and I expect you to answer me. What's our current unemployment rate?
12%.
Up to 12% in California. And many people have what? Are they still looking for work? So As I said, told somebody this afternoon, I kind of am afraid to talk with you because I don't have a lot of good things to say. Where do you think that puts a youngster with disabilities in the big scheme of things? Tough out there, right? Look at the next page on number 5. Similar statistics. Now, these statistics are coming from the Department of Labor, and it's sort of scary. If you read down those bullets in the middle, 3 times as many live in poverty, inadequate transportation, health care. All right, so that's the picture. So I'm asking you to pay very close attention as parents and also as service providers that you keep that focus. This is where we're going, right? That's where we're going. So we have to be very careful to keep our eye upon that. Now, many of you are under the IDEA legislation. What's the purpose of that legislation? What's the purpose of school for typical children? What's the purpose? Just nice to get an education?
Prepare for their adult life.
Ah, and what's the adult life? Work, right? Work, 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 work.
Productive and independent, hopefully meaningful work.
Right, that's probably the last on the list here. As independent as they can be and in the as much of a work environment as possible. Even if the work they have to do is to take care of themselves as much as possible, that's still work, right? So that's the purpose of education generally, because what does a society want? What are they educating people for, to be workers? What does that give the society at large? Huh? What does the society want from us? Money. Taxes, right?
Educated workers.
An educated workforce, right? And what's happening in our country today? Are we questioning whether we have a big enough educated workforce? We sure are. Big questions about that. And whether the workforce that we have actually has the skills to do the jobs that we have available. Right? So I'm saying to you, when you're looking at your children, your clients, whatever, you need to look at the big picture. It's one thing to want a youngster to walk from here to there or learn how to identify nouns. I'm asking you to look at the donut. Where are we going here? So I want you now to tell me, what does the workforce want? What do they want? What kind of skills? Yeah.
They're doing the green movement now.
A what?
The green, the recycling, the green movement, everything.
Well, that's not the green movement the lady suggests, but that's not, what is a worker, what are entry-level work skills? Bottom line. Pardon me? Come on, guys, talk up. I can't hear you. Social skills, for one, right? Social skills meaning you can get along with your employer, your bus driver, right? The public in some form or another. You have some basic conversation skills so you can talk to your coworkers, right? Social skill. Never mind you have close personal friends. The workforce wants these other social skills. That you can be a coworker, quote, coworker. When you go into the stores, right, Target, we don't have employees. We have coworkers, associates, right? So those social skills on a very superficial level are important. What else does the workplace want? Basic academics. Basic academics. Right? Absolutely. And that would be reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? If you're going to be a Starbucks barista, Look at it that way. And I'm asking you to think about it in those terms. So look out at the people you encounter as you go through life in your work or out in the community. You know, what kind of skills would entry-level work expect? Okay, what else?
Good attendance.
Hmm?
Good attendance.
Good attendance, which falls into the area of work habits.
Punctuality.
Punctuality, all that's work habits. Reliability, proper grooming. Now, also, the workplace also wants things like problem solving. Problem solving. They want you to be able to make decisions about things and solve problems, and they also want multitasking. Multitasking. So these are the work habits that people expect from employees have risen, all right? Because, you know, there are workers out there, they're especially in the last few years. So far we have social skills, we have basic academics, and we have work habits. What else in this technological society do?
Computer skills.
Computer skills. And I think you can take almost all the other pieces and put them into one of those 4 categories. Gotta have some basic computer skills, right? The 5th category that our kids need is self-advocacy. They've got to have self-advocacy. So let's take a look at our handout book. You have that page? My handouts are second to the last one. Now, one of the pieces of the donut that I'm asking you to think about and always consider is that you need to start working on these 5 areas from the time a youngster at least goes into school. You must start then. So what I want you to do is tell me how you would start on some of these things as we go through some of these competencies. Now, as Sharon told you, I started out and was in most of my career a special educator. I love data. I love IEP goals. But they have to be of a certain kind to be meaningful. And what I have here on the first page is they have to be probable and proofable. I made up some of those words. But how many of you have been in IEPs? They're lots of fun, aren't they? According to the law, do those goals have to be met? How many think they have to be met or should be met legally? Oh, you've all learned? No, they don't have to be met. Should, could, would, whatever. They do not, according to the law, have to be met. They are a guideline. The only thing that is pretty much a legal requirement is that the services determined by the IEP to be necessary are in fact provided. Okay? But the goals themselves don't have to be met. A reasonable amount of progress is sufficient. Now, I'm sure you have sat in IEPs, and whatever the goals are, what's reported to you are they have made progress, right? Definitely have made progress. You get a bunch of numbers, tests they've done, or something like that. They've made progress. Now the district is not trying to be divisive or elusive or whatever. That's what they have to do. So how do you, as parents and service providers, look at IEP goals? For one, you should have something tangible to show that progress has been made. Work samples. You should be able to see the test that was given to see what that progress meant. You also, if possible, should be able to assess that progress yourself as a parent. And there's no reason that that shouldn't be possible. So you should be able to probe. In data collection, it's called a probe. to take a look at that IEP goal and be able to test it along the way yourself. Why would you want to do that? You want to leave it all till the end of the year and then, right? Got to get in there, folks. You want to see proof that some progress is made, so you want to understand how that goal is written. Let's take a look at English Language Arts. What I've done is, these goals were written for the Learning Disabilities Association as a junior high, high school level target. But you can begin to think about where you're going. Again, these goals are geared toward work skills that kids should leave school with. So no matter what level your youngster functions at what level your youngster functions, you know, in your mind, just tone them down a little bit. But this is where you're going. You want basic reading fluency, right? You want kids to read at approximately the 6th grade level. If you think about newspapers, magazines, sometimes the magazines, I think, are maybe 3rd, 4th grade, don't you? But, you know, 6th grade is good to aim for. Now, how do you know, when you're at an IEP, how do you know what grade level your youngster's reading? What proof do you have of that usually? What? Standardized tests, they give you a number, right? That's it, right? What about an actual book? Right? The library has books at certain levels. What I've given you here is the Dibbles, D-I-B-E-L-S website. These are tests that you can download yourself. They're developed by the University of Oregon. Very good. That's one of the best special ed universities in the country. It's a very good, and it's not hard. It's not hard, right? You can do it yourself. And it makes you feel like you have a little more control over the data that you're receiving. All right, so take a look at that. You can start testing kids at very beginning levels. So when you go into an IEP, you can say, well, gee, my youngster did the Dibbles, and I don't know, can you explain why this isn't what you're telling me? All right? Number 2, reading comprehension. Dibbles will also do that. Do they understand what they're reading, even at a very beginning level? Can they write a 5-paragraph product? And I've put it in terms of the adult, what the adult world is looking for. Can you write a letter of request? With appropriate punctuation so someone can understand it. Now let me ask you, in elementary school, for instance, how would you begin to work on these things? In a very natural environment.
Repetition.
Well, I put it in a natural environment. How would you work? When would a youngster have to read something? How about if you put a note on the refrigerator asking them to do something? How else? What other functional way could you, begin to talk to them about work? Chores, I heard somebody say, right? Can make a list of chores. Could they check them off when they finish them?
Simple cooking using a recipe with
Okay.
directions.
Okay. Simple recipe. You can use pictures in communications, that's fine too. But to focus what's happening on the real world and what they're going to need to target that donut. All right? Children who are doing a little better, you can have a schedule for the day. So you're putting it in writing. Now what about their putting something in writing?
Thank you cards and thank you notes.
Excellent. Thank you notes.
Grocery list.
Grocery lists. Great. Hmm? Word game, well, yeah. Yeah. It's good to keep it functional. You know, make it something that is part of their life. It's a good thing to do that. All right, you understand the picture? Are there any questions about that? You get the idea here? It's one thing to do academic tasks. It's another thing to keep your eye upon that donut in terms of what they're going to need to do as functional human beings. And I'm encouraging the service providers here to think about and talk about those things with their clients as well. All right, because sometimes the whole becomes kind of esoteric academic standards out there, you know, which I encourage and which are good. If kids are capable, that's fine. But, you know, the bottom line is what's going to happen down the road. Okay? Do you have a question?
I just, a comment, often newspapers or things like the Week or Newsweek have little tiny stories that are maybe 10 or 15 lines long, and you can either read them to the kid, and there's things of all interest
Right.
in there, about animals to, you know, world pollution.
Right.
And talk about it.
Well, that's right, to talk in a family about what's going on in the world. And to incorporate that, because that's a social skill. You know, they're going to be in social environments, to include them in the conversation at whatever level is appropriate. That's an excellent idea. Even when you're watching TV, to ask questions about what we're seeing on TV. But to keep that focus on family life, community life, that kind of thing. All right, let's turn the page. And that comes in, what I just said comes into the vocabulary, building vocabulary. And when I have here adult consumer level, the districts have some very good benchmark standards, list of standards. Well, of course, the standards are good to take a look at if you're at that level. But also, through the year, many districts have a list of benchmarks that they're using. And as you go through the grades, those benchmarks should reflect the kind of age grade appropriate skills. So you can take a look at that. But what I'm also saying to you is use your own experience in this world. You see, and as you're going around in your own daily activities, think about the kinds of things that you need to know and you need to be able to do. Okay, that's a very good way to keep your focus realistic. Okay, now let's look at math. I'm not going to go through all those. Basically, as the lady over here suggested, you can use the math parts in recipes. In anything if you're going to the store to add things up. I know you've heard some of this before, and I'm sure you've thought about it. But think about it more. Think about what kind of consumer math skills you have to survive. Money, money, right? Absolutely. Absolutely. So you can start that very early and have kids do as much as they can on their own, and as they practice, they'll get better and better at it. But these are also goals that as you get to some of these levels that you ask your school systems to work on, because they are actually mandated by legislation, both just basic education and special ed legislation, to work toward employment and independent. That's what they're supposed to do. So you can be always asking for those kinds of things. All right, now how about computer skills? You know, if you have the resources, it's good to have a computer accessible for children, no matter what level they are. Now, it's true, some parents are concerned about what they get off the computer. But I understand, I don't know how to do it, but there are great programs where you can restrict time and the kinds of programs that kids can access. I listened to one of the earlier speakers who was telling us that some of the video games may be actually good to build circuitry in the brain. PBS has some nice things on there. So computer skills. Now what I've listed, you might think of more. In terms of keyboarding, to start keyboarding early, very early. Even if kids aren't using the proper strategies, I don't know, I think that, there's question about that. As we know, some kids, we don't know how they find the letters, but they just go and they learn how to do it. It's best if they learn keyboarding properly. For kids that might be headed to the workforce generally, by 4th grade, it's probably a good idea to be very much tuned into that. Proficient use of word processing, of course, and all that, because those are accommodations and strategies that they can use as they grow up. So focusing, again, what do you need? Right? What's the basic stuff that you need in your work? You probably need word processing. All right, internet search. Gosh, what we can find out on internet search. But little kids can use that. They can learn how to do that. It's as good as a dictionary, right? Data entry. Those of you who are a little more proficient on the computer can set up an Excel spreadsheet and they can keep track of something, right? And then email. You can ask some of your family to email the kids. That would give them practice in writing, right? Okay. Now, self-advocacy. Self-advocacy, there are 2 parts to self-advocacy in terms of how you analyze your disability. For youngsters that can understand that they have a difficulty in an area, it's good to start to talk to them about it early on. This is the real world. You have a little trouble with this. They know that they have trouble with something. They see other kids. But then to start them thinking about, okay, I don't have trouble with this. So maybe I should look for situations or tasks or classes where I don't have as much trouble. You don't have to climb every mountain. I mean, pick what works. And then the other side of that is, okay, I really can't do this. This is very hard for me. Okay, how can I compensate for this? We can't remediate forever. You have to find the compensatory, whether it's computer or whatever. And that's part of what the schools are required to do, to help you find those compensatory helpers and also help you to build strategies. I think strategy training, I don't see that a lot in IEPs. And that's very, very important. To help youngsters recognize what the problem is, that's our problem-solving thing that they want us to do. But to develop strategies, and you can do that at home too, right? You can talk, okay, well, you can't do this. Let's think about a way that you could do it. What do you need? So that's a big part of self-advocacy. Because then you can start to say, okay, if I need this, where am I going to find it? How am I going to get it? And from a legal point of view, I hate to tell you, but the workplace, do you think they're going to be happy providing accommodations? No. Did you happen to notice we just had a big celebration of the American with Disabilities Act, right? Who did you see on TV most of all celebrating that? What kind of disabilities? Did anybody see anything on that? What kind of disabilities were? Pretty much physical disabilities. Pretty much physical, which is great. I mean, that's wonderful. But the greatest response of the ADA and 504 has been to those with physical disabilities. Okay, because part of the law is saying that the worker has to have the essential skills of the job. And then accommodations can be requested to give equal access. It's a civil rights legislation that is saying equal access. But first you have to have the essential skills for the job. So those of our kids with intellectual disabilities, that's hard, right? And it's to the point that many people with learning disabilities, higher functioning, Asperger's, those kinds of issues, don't even tell them that they have a disability. Because put yourself in a position of the employer. Are they at this stage of time going to be feeling magnanimous? Okay? So there again, you have to be very realistic. Very realistic. But it helps if the individual knows what they need. Now we're also talking about going into the education system, going into community college, etc. You have to know what you need. So it's good to start kids from very young to understand what they need. Because to look at it as an entitlement, that may not be the way to look at it. Okay, so how could you do that at home? Or how could providers encourage parents to do this at home, to develop self-advocacy skills?
Question the child, talk with the child.
Huh?
Ask the child what difficulty he or she has at school or in the home, and see if the child can tell you what they need.
Okay, you can just ask the youngster, well, what do you think you're having trouble, kind of problem solve with them. Ask them to think about it with you. When you go to an amusement park, well, gee, what do you think we need to do here that would make it easier for you? Okay, think along those lines. Think along those lines. All right, now also social skills. Here we are at social skills. What do you do at home for kids to develop the kind of social skills that the workplace wants? The workplace. I think you guys need to think about this a little bit. Hmm?
Ask questions just about
Oh, okay.
what happened at school.
Okay. And to share, to be able to respond to conversation. All right.
Encourage them to solve their own problems or issues as much as possible instead of mom or dad or grandparent stepping in to solve whatever their problems are
That could be, and
from an early age.
right, but part of that also is that they learn to test out some of the solutions they come up with. To say, well, did that work for you? So that they begin to analyze for themselves, well, wait a minute, that didn't work too well. All right? Yeah.
I find some of the children I deal with have not even been asked in our crazy busy world to learn how to say, hello, how are you today? Just give a basic greeting and acknowledgement with a little bit of eye contact or
Right.
close there too.
Right.
And that common courtesy goes a long way in our
Yeah.
world.
Courtesy, oh my. Employers love courtesy. And in fact, it's gotten to the point for me, one more greeter. And I'm getting a little hostile, It's none of their business how I feel. But that's what the teamwork is supposed to do, right?
And role playing with the
Role play, all those good things that the Mind Institute does, and they do in school as well. There are social skill groups, but again, that's something to be asking for as part of your IEP, is access to social groups, yeah.
One thing that I've heard that's kind of missing is just giving them that experience.
The experience.
It's not, like role playing is great, but it can only go so far if they're not in the experience.
Right,
So just as many experiences and across context.
right. And what I'm suggesting is you keep that focus when you provide the experiences. Where are we going? Where are we going? Okay, so yeah, there's lots of things that you can do. All right, let me see if we have, oh yeah, work habits. That's important. Now I have 2 granddaughters, and when they watch TV at my house, I insist that they do something else too, so that they're multitasking, right? I mean, that's what we're dealing with, that kind of world. It used to be you wouldn't want kids to be doing 2 things at once because they'll be distracted, right? But to the extent that they can handle it, that's what the world is asking of them, to do 2 or 3 things at once. So that's a good thing to do, and I think you can figure out, you know, other kinds of work habits from that. Okay, let's move on. I want to get through this a little bit. Okay, let's look at our book again, our transition book. Let's look at page 5. I would suggest that you put the corner down on some of the pages we're going over, because I think this book is a great resource, but I also think I have a little criticism once in a while. So I want to direct your attention to certain areas. Page 5, a lot of the book uses a lot of verbiage, good verbiage, but a lot of very non-specific kind of verbiage to talk about transition and work services and that kind of thing. I want you, as you look at this book, to pay attention to the actual services that a school district should be providing. You see on page 5? Talks about career counseling. Well, now let me ask you something. Does any 16-year-old, which is when you have a transition, do they have any real notion of career? No. So, I don't know, career counseling. What you want are actual services. Community-based instruction, job training, supported employment, functional evaluations to determine whether a youngster has capacity in certain areas. All right, so you want to, when you're reading this book, you want to think about actually what services might be provided. Let's look, see, we're going to go back and forth. Let's look now in our handouts and look at a transition plan. It's after the, I'm going to have to skip some of this because some of it's, look at a transition plan after the LD Online. Do you see any, tell me if you find the services that are going to be provided. Give me an example of one service here.
That's training. Community experiences. Community experiences.
Okay, community experiences.
It says it's supposed to be supported by services.
By what?
Transition activities as appropriate, and it says to be supported by services, documented.
A lot of it is connecting you to services when you leave school. What are the resources in the community, right? So a lot of that is information, that the service is an information service. And I'm cautioning you to get direct services, not just information. When you have a form like this, you have an individual transition plan, and it is on the CDE website. A form like this kind of puts you in a pathway toward certain things. But remember, the law has no forms. So because this is laid out a certain way, that doesn't mean it has to be done that way. And a lot of transition plans are short, are basically providing information to other things, but don't include much in the way of services to the youngster directly. So I'm cautioning you about that, to take a look. On the next page, I've outlined some transition goals that should be in the transition plan, as well as all the other goals we talked about that would be in the IEP plan. Do you understand the difference here? Because I've talked with a lot of parents and been in a lot of situations as an attorney where the transition goal page is very, very cursory. And this is a big time issue, big time. Let's look at page 132 on the transition book. This is a list of commercial assessments. I have never seen on an IEP in the last, I'll just take a year, I haven't seen the service of assessment provided once, not once. The most I've seen is an interest inventory. What's an interest inventory? Did you ever take an interest inventory?
You like to work outside, you like to work
Huh?
inside, you like dogs.
Yeah, do you like dogs? Do you like, which would you rather do? Play with a dog or go sailing?
Read a book.
Okay. Now, you as an adult have a lot of interests. Does that guide what you do vocationally? Maybe. Maybe. But what if you can't do what you like to do? Okay, a lot of our kids are given a lot of expectations that are very unrealistic. And an interest inventory is interesting. It's interesting. But it's not telling us where this youngster can go work-wise, what they can do. It just offers a little information. What do you really want to know in terms of assessment about a youngster?
It's true ability.
Hmm?
What is he good at?
Ah, what they'd be good at, right? What they can do. Now you'll notice on page 133, there's only one test for aptitude. That's called aptitude, is what they can do. So pay attention to that. Ask for an aptitude test. Ask for a more extensive assessment for vocational planning. Okay? But they have a lot of other, I mean, look at all the surveys that are available on personality inventory, career information. Look at 2 pages on career information. You get the drift here? You want the hardcore services. All right, now go back to our handouts. I'm going to give you a grade whether you're following all this back and forth stuff. All right, let's look at page 9 in your transition book. What does age of majority mean? What does that mean to you as a parent? You've lost control of the situation, right? Your youngster can decide they want to leave school, they can decide what they want at an IEP. Is this a good thing? Probably not. Probably not, right? You want to be very careful about this. The districts are required to notify you and the child about the age of majority. And for many children who don't have, who don't exactly know what's going on, they'll assume the age of majority. When you go to an IEP, you have no legal right for input. So how might you take care of that?
Conservatorship. Conservatorship.
You don't need a conservatorship.
Power of attorney.
What?
Power of attorney.
Don't need a power of attorney. Look at the next page in your. You need an assignment of educational decision-making rights. You need to have your youngsters sign their educational rights over to you. Be very careful to watch this.
Does this need to be notarized?
Wouldn't hurt. Doesn't have to be according to, this is coming from, what am I thinking? It's coming from disability rights folks who are all attorneys there. And they don't have a notarization on it, but it never hurts.
So the child has to sign it.
Yes, the child has to sign it. So it'd be a good idea to have it witnessed, yeah.
So should it be typed or the child has to handwrite it? Because some kids don't read or write to the grade level. It's basically like the parents write.
Well, the districts could not allege that they had made an informed decision. By the same token, you could probably, I would check with disability rights. I actually haven't had that situation in my particular practice, but that's a good question. In other words, make sure it's a legal document that you have educational rights, if you're not, using a conservator or other kinds of legal authority. But usually the situations in which this is most often is an issue is with higher functioning kids who are, high-level Asperger's, learning disabilities, attention disorders, that kind of thing, where they inadvertently, take over their rights, and then the parent has no say. This is also something to watch in terms of kids with higher-level verbal skills who are learning self-advocacy skills and being encouraged to run their own IEPs. It's very good to run their own IEPs, and it's very good to develop those skills. However, many of you have been in IEPs. Those IEPs, the time can go by, the goals that are suggested, blah, blah, blah. You walk out of the meeting and you don't have the depth or quality of an IEP because your youngsters made all the decisions. So you need to watch that. Do you understand? It's very important. I've sat in IEPs where youngsters run and they come out with a terrible IEP because they are at an age of majority, or they're being encouraged to run their own IEPs, and parents think this is a great idea, right? It's a good idea, and it is. But you should limit the time that they're self-advocating, and you take over from there. So I'm just cautioning you on these certain little things. All right, because you want the best IEP you can get. So that's section 1 that you want to take a look at. With regard to some of those things, I think you need to start preparing students very young in terms of introducing those concepts. To talk to your children about, I'm going to be involved in your IEPs for quite a while, and I want to be able to help you, and we might have to make this a legal issue. To talk to them, to prepare them for these things, to prepare them to talk about work. We want to prepare for the workplace. There's some interesting data coming out about our current graduates from college even. Their expectations are very high. right? They're going to come out of college, they're going to get $60,000 to $70,000 job. Meanwhile, they can't get a job, as I said, as a barista. So when we're talking to our youngsters about career, what they want to be, they need to be thinking, well, what can I do again? What can I really do? My daughter, who has multiple learning disabilities and mild cerebral palsy, she wanted to be a dental hygienist. I mean, she's got cerebral palsy. She thought that was a neat job. And often people are asking the kids, well, what do you want to be? And then they're talking to them about how do you do that? Well, that's not realistic. Yeah.
I should say, I find that a hard area, teaching area to help parents look at more realistically. Do you have any suggestions in that area?
How to help them?
How to help parents look at their child more realistically in that way?
The question is, how do you help parents look at that more realistically? And, I'm going to just be very simplistic. I think you always tell kids pretty much the truth. And I think you direct their attention to the real world. Now, if there are complications, you need to talk to therapists about that. I'm not a counseling therapist. As an educator, though, my tendency is to let's look at this realistically. To teach the youngster how to problem solve the real world. All right, like with my daughter, I said, your hand shakes. You think this is a good idea? It's part of that self-advocacy to look, as you go through life, as you go through the shopping. What do you think? What do you think? What do you think you need to be able to do that job? Okay? Very, very realistically. The other thing they're finding, even with kids graduating from college, they don't understand the concept of paying your dues. Right? Not at all. They think they're entitled. Well, I think sometimes when we're dealing with kids with special needs, we focus on our entitlements through the law, and there are many, and they're good. But, there's a real world out there, so come on. Sometimes parents think, well, I'm entitled to this, I'm entitled to that. They should be able to do this and that. Well, you have to be realistic too. Go for the donut. Don't go for a lot of this other, for the whole and everything around. Go for what you need to go for. All right? Now, let's move along. I really want you to take a look at the workability handout in your handouts. Workability is a great program. It's page 222. What is workability? Does anybody know? Yeah.
It's through Department of Rehab, and they have to have a documented disability, I think, for the state. They don't have to have a counselor go through it, but they do have to be documented. And then I think there are classes on employment and work behavior, and then they help them to actually hopefully get a job, but do the resume, and at least that's the way it is at our school.
Okay. Now that program is actually through the California Department of Education in conjunction with rehab, but it's really addressing what the school district is required to do as part of preparing students for employment. Okay? So you're quite right. A lot of times it's a class on how to fill out a resume, how to have an interview. Now, let me ask you, you think you're going to pay attention to all that stuff in a class? No. It sounds good. It sounds good to the parents. Sounds good. No. I've seen very few instances where that's really that valuable for kids. Sorry, go ahead.
No, my clients actually go out to a job site.
Oh, they actually go out to a job site. That's right. Workability is also required to actually take students out to job sites, have them shadow. They can shadow careers. Let's say, they want to be this or that. They can shadow someone in that field Walk around with them, see what they're, what is involved. They are also entitled to be coached. I love coaching. Coaching, I see that very little in this transition workbook, the word coaching. Coaching is wonderful. This is where a youngster goes on a job. They have a job coach provided by the district under a transition plan to go with them, to help them spot problems, to act as a coach in the job itself. So I would say for any child with any special need that has any possibility of being in a work situation, to get coaching. Absolutely get coaching as part of your transition plan. Absolutely. It's very helpful. It's really a very good assessment of where the youngster is and what they need to work on.
No, I was going to say, actually, that's K-12, and I'm post-secondary, so ours is a little bit different, but we do have the workability instructors bring students to us and work with us on planning, which is
Okay,
great.
so
They've been wonderful.
So you're the Department of Rehab, and they're out of the school system, right? They're out of IDEA now.
Yeah.
That's right.
Coming to the community.
Very important to note. Once you graduate with a diploma, or you voluntarily leave school, you're out of IDEA. That's why you want to watch this age of majority thing, because a lot of kids want to get out, right? You don't want them out. You don't want them out. And there again, that's another thing where you should start talking to them early on about, look, it might take you a little longer to get through school. We want to get as many services as we can. Getting a so-called diploma, you can get a certificate of completion. That's okay. But a high school diploma, I have many people who have higher functioning kids and they only want a high school diploma. That's not keeping your eye on the donut. That's keeping your eye on the hole. Because think about it. If you have a diploma, you can get a diploma fairly easily. You probably have a lot of those skills. But if it's a chore for you to get a diploma and you're just focusing on that diploma, you're going to get out in the workforce and you're not going to be able to compete anyway. So you should stay and get as many services as you can and help that youngster. Even with kids who are college bound, they can still be in school and they can take a class at a community college as part of their transition plan. Maybe even with a coach. You see what I mean? So they can take a few classes in the high school and then go to the community college for a class or two. All those services are part of what you're entitled to. Workability will also help you get a job and maybe even supplement it with some funding supported. And you'll see them in my transition goals. I want the kids to have a job for 3 months. Yeah.
Can be requested when the kid is in high school as a senior?
Yes. What age does your transition plan start?
16.
Right. Okay, absolutely. There again, it's one thing to pass a course, but the more important thing, what's that course going to do for your work target? You see? I keep saying it, I don't know if I'm getting it across. I have dealt with so many parents who are focused on, got to get through this course, got to get a diploma, got to do this, got to, gotta be integrated with all the kids in the high school. High school is a crazy time. Socially, it's a disaster. Who cares if they're integrated some of the time? You want to focus on where they're going. All right, workability. So read over this workability thing here. You'll see that it provides a lot of services. Everyone should be accessing that. Even if your youngster, let's say your youngster has very few disabilities, you want to get them working, because what they will learn from working is what's called work hardening. They learn how to work. Okay, so sometimes we wait too long. You know, we figure, well, they're not ready to work. Well, you've got to start early. Have them working, even if they're volunteering. They could volunteer. They can volunteer in junior high school. They can volunteer in elementary school. But get them working, because that's where they're going. Okay, in your transition book, there are a couple sections. Section 3 is preparatory experiences, family involvement. They're good. Interagencies, they give you a list of interagencies. Now, in our community, we have, you know, work development programs, Goodwill Industries and Alliance, Pride Industries. Some of you have heard of that. These are transition work programs for those with more disabilities. Now, even there, I'm going to ask you a question. Even when you go through one of these programs, these are youngsters who have more serious disabilities. What kind of jobs do you think a lot of them get? Even with Department of Rehab help. Fast food, right. Some of the programs, the kids work in groups. Department of Rehab will only provide job coaching for a certain period of time. If your youngster is not regional center, that will stop at a certain point. So getting under regional center is very important too, because you can get extended job coaching with that. Yeah.
How long? What's the extension?
Actually, regional center, if a youngster requires job coaching consistently, you can get it almost indefinitely, if that's a service that they need. Now, also, when youngsters, back to the work world at large, you know, when you're trying to get a youngster, even with mild disabilities, a job through one of these agencies, how delighted are employers to help you? They're just not. They're just not. Now, I've always contended they passed the American with Disabilities Act in 504, but they didn't provide any funding for employers. I mean, if you gave an employer a certain amount of money, you know, to supplement, and this person would work for less wage, maybe you'd get a little more cooperation. But when these laws were passed, this particularly ADA, everybody celebrated. It was passed in 1990, and as I said, the last few weeks, you know, they've been all excited. Employers hate it. They hate it. Chamber of Commerce opposed it right from the beginning. And do you think they're very savvy about how to avoid it? Absolutely. They hardly ever win cases. It's a civil rights law, and so, you know, don't count on some of those things. Okay, now, what if you can't pass the CASI? Now, right now, you don't have to pass the high school exit exam, kids with disabilities. But what are some of the alternatives to getting a diploma if you needed it for your work or something? Do you know?
Taking and passing the GED if possible.
Passing the GED is one of them. There's also another exam that not many people know about. It's, No, CAPA will not give you a diploma. But there's a high school, I always forget the name of it. It's a big, long name. High school equivalency, right. There's another test that's easier than the GED. That is the equivalent of a high school diploma. Other people have gone on the internet and graduated from high school. They are online. So if this is something, you know, that's really, you think it's going to pay off in some way for you, there are other alternatives. Because what happens also in the schools, kids aren't passing the CASI. So districts are giving them remedial classes, a bunch of remedial classes to pass the CASI, which then takes time away from other classes that might be more productive, such as employment classes or that. So, you know, you have to kind of balance all those things out. Okay, I want to give you time, and to ask questions if you have them. Let me summarize. One, you got to be realistic. And to start out underemployed, as you'll read in the statistics, many people with disabilities are underemployed. What does that mean? No.
Not able to provide substantially for they're more capable than what they're doing.
They're more capable than what they're doing.
Exactly.
They're more capable than what they're doing. Well, is that true in the workplace for a lot of people? Yeah. But it doesn't, in terms of a youngster with disabilities, it's kind of good to be underemployed, at least to start, to get that work hardening, to do something that isn't too hard. Okay? To start there and then work up from there. So underemployment is not a bad thing in that sense, or part-time employment. Okay? Number two, because of the situation in the economy, the Department of Labor put out a list of who's hiring. Well, who do you think's hiring? What areas? Health, right. Get this one, criminal justice. The third area is another interesting one. The third area is creative services. This is where people figure out a service that somebody needs, and then they provide it, like dog walking, like personal shopper, like, you know, you can get anything right out there. You can pay, and someone will do it for you. Well, sometimes for higher functioning kids, it's not a bad idea to think outside the box. Use family and friends if they have a business to kind of get someone started. Volunteer, of course, is good. But you know what? Even in volunteering, now you have to apply. They make you fill out an application to volunteer. It's a rough world out there. All right. The other thing, a lot of kids, going back to how the new generation feels entitled, they're not willing to relocate. They're not willing to think about the scarcity. You know, coming up, there's going to be a big scarcity of teachers. They're getting fired now, but they'll get hired, you know. People will retire. The big areas where there's scarcity, to not be unrealistic, to aim for areas where there's going to be a need. Okay? In some ways, I don't care what your interests are. What can you do? What's realistic? And then, of course, bottom line is, what if they're not going to work? What are your options? Are there any benefits available for people with disabilities? SSI, right? SSI. Now, does SSI give you a lot of money? No. And for a lot of kids, a lot of families, the only way SSI is going to work for them is if they have a roommate or they live at home. But also SSI gives you Medicare, gives you health care. So that's kind of a disincentive to get a job, you see, because some of the jobs you're going to get are part-time, and you know, so that's not going to provide the health care. I know, you know, as I said, when I started I was going to talk about transition, it's not great news, but that's why you have to be even more firm in where you're going and start early. So you do the best job you can to prepare. Of course, if you have some resources, a special needs trust is a good idea. There are attorneys that do that. Many families get life insurance. So as long as they're alive, you know, they can help and provide. But at their death, the life insurance goes into a special needs trust for the youngster. So there are things to look at, just in case. Because you see in the statistics we looked at, and you can see it on the street, there are a lot of people who are on the street who have disabilities. You see that, right? So you want to think about how you're going to provide just in case. On that sad note, do you have any questions? Yeah.
How long does the IEP last once the child graduates high school?
The IEP goes to age 21 without graduating.
Oh, well, completion, certificate of
If you get a certificate of completion till 21. But don't get that, I mean, don't get that diploma so fast. Yeah.
I've been at a couple transition IEPs where students are being told that because they don't have to pass the CASI to get their diploma, they're on that track to get the diploma. And what are their legal rights when they choose to have the certificate of completion? Because the school's telling them no. And, you know, at that point, I was really surprised. I hadn't heard that. So next time I go into an IEP, I want to have proof or be prepared on what to say to be a better advocate.
Tricky, isn't it? What this lady is saying, that she's being told at IEPs, since the kids with special needs don't have to pass the exit exam any longer, at least right now, that they are on the track to get a diploma, and they will get a diploma and they will be exited when they get that diploma. And what are your legal rights with that? Well, what you have to do is craft, that's where you have to be treated. You have to craft your IEP, especially the transition plan. Your youngster doesn't have to take courses necessarily that lead to a diploma. You see what I mean? You can request that they get a job, for instance, so that you don't let them acquire the credits. You see, you don't want them to get the credits they need for a diploma. So you have to watch that IEP, and that should start very early, again, should start as you start high school. Don't aim for the diploma all the time.
I have a little insight on that, because that's what happened with my client, and we refused to take econ and government. We said no. And he did not take, we put him in a ROP that took him off campus. So,
And he didn't get credits toward graduation.
no, he got a certificate of completion.
You see, because once you get the credits, you know, theoretically, they can exit you with a diploma. Yeah.
You were talking about the exam that would give you the equivalent of the diploma. What courses does the child need to have? Is that the diploma track courses? Do they need to have that to take that? Or
Okay, the question is the California Proficiency High School Proficiency Exam that you can take, and that is supposedly equivalent to a diploma. It's supposedly equivalent to a diploma. So you wouldn't necessarily have to have the credits for a diploma. It depends on your district and how they're board, but you can look that up on the CDE website and get information.
so potentially can you be on the certificate track and extend it to age 21 and then take that exam
If
to
you
get
choose
something
to,
equivalent?
if you choose to.
Yeah. But I really don't know why you'd want to do that. I mean, you can just drop out, or you know, as I said, I think the trick is to get as many services as you can for as long as you can. Okay, that gives you, and make sure they're good targeted services. Because you don't have to take economics. You can take something that doesn't give you the same credits. Because, you know, to exit high school, you have to have a certain number of English classes, and you know. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I was told that even if the student gets the full credits to get the diploma, if you write it on the IEP, that you can be there till age 22. That's important, so I don't know why.
Yeah, you can say that you're not on the diploma track. But I would be careful of accepting credits. I really would. I'd be careful of accepting credits. And if you know, if you think about it, there are many other things that kids should be taking that are not academically competent. So that transition plan is an important thing to look at. It's not enough to just give you information about what that rehab or what other services are available. They need to do a lot more to prepare you, to prepare the youngster for a work world. Any other questions? Where? Oh, sorry, yes.
I've had parents be very resistant to taking their child off of the diploma track because then they won't get the high school diploma. And I have suggested to them, though I've never had anyone take me up on it, and I'm asking you for your legal opinion, can the school, example the econ class, because the child is now 20 years old, can the school send the child to the city college to take the econ class with a college coach, and so now they're 20 or 21 years old doing it, and still get the high school diploma because now they've done an AP course?
I would think so. I would think so.
And so they're really on the diploma track. We're
Right.
just kind of protecting them until they're able to complete successfully the diploma requirements.
Because those would be accommodations. Remember, legally, IDEA is a small part of 504. 504 applies on a much wider range than IDEA. So if they're under IDEA, they are entitled to all accommodations and all the things that 504 provides. You see? So you could argue that. And there are many instances where children are, and they have to be transported, remember, to the community college, and can do it that way.
The schools will say flat out no.
Okay.
And so now
Okay, now what do? The school says no.
we don't do that, never have heard of it.
I mean, I've heard of it, but maybe. And after all, remember, the schools, there again, what are we dealing with here? We're dealing with an education system in California that is sorely, sorely underfunded. Now, that's not our problem. It's your problem as a citizen, you know, but it's not your problem as a parent of a child with special needs. So there's going to be resistance. And I will tell you legally, in terms of, you know, under due process, you can file for a hearing. The state, in its wisdom, let's see, maybe 5, 6 years ago, changed the judges that judge hearings in special ed. Used to be McGeorge School of Law ran the hearings. There was a much more 50-50 rate of success for parents with McGeorge School of Law. Then the state, which is the California Department of Education, is the contract. You might think there's a little bit of a conflict of interest there, but they now employ state judges. And the rate of parents prevailing has gone to 10%. Down. So you have to understand that districts are empowered a little bit there, aren't they? Whereas they used to think twice before saying no, now they don't have to think so much about it, you know? So you have to understand that too. And hearings can be expensive and contentious for no reason, but sometimes filing is okay. The other thing you can do, though, is file a complaint. And you can do that as a parent. So if you can if the district says no, you can, and many advocates can help you with this, or the disability rights. You can craft it in such a way that you are filing a complaint about some procedural defect in requesting something like Suzanne's talking about. So there are ways to make it uncomfortable when the district says no. But you know, guys, just as an advocacy thing, you know, whenever you go to an IEP, you must always tape. Don't walk in that door without a tape. And you've got to give them 24 hours notice. So that prevents a lot of things. All right, secondly, when a district says no, you want that in writing. there's a notice requirement that they have to write out why they said no, what the factors were that they considered in saying no. You all know that, right? Do you? That's right, all right. So, you know, just because they say no, you don't take that right off the bat. Now, you still might lose, but you've got a few things to go through. All right, any other questions? Yeah.
Do these rules apply to kids who are in an independent study, like a homeschool or independent study program? They have an IEP, but they're in an independent study program.
They apply in a charter school, absolutely. The law entirely applies in a charter school, which is iffy. Homeschooling, not everything applies in homeschooling. Sometimes there you only get an IEP, a partial IEP in terms of supplementary services. So you have to check with an attorney about that for homeschooling per se. But charter schools, all these things apply. Okay? Yeah.
I have a question. If your child has already reached the age of majority, signed all those kind of papers so that you could work with them, and then one of the support personnel tells the child that you're going to file for conservatorship, and the child just reacts and takes you off of everything. And everyone I've gone to talk about that says, well, he's an adult, he can do what he wants. And we can't talk to you now because he won't let us.
That's probably true. I don't do conservatorships, so I can't advise you about that. But that may be true. That may be true. You need to consult. Again, I would.
I wasn't going to do it. That's what that wasn't even in my mind. But the worker told him that so that he took away everything immediately. And I have no recourse to say that she shouldn't even have said that to him without any evidence. And she had no evidence.
Well, after all, remember, if you're the age of majority, you can assign your rights to someone and you can take them away.
But the parent then has no legal right, that person shouldn't have said that kind of thing to the child?
Not that I know of. And that's why I'm cautioning you about these certain parts in this transition book. Because districts, my experience is districts will talk to the students early on about the age of majority and that after all they can make their own decisions. You see? And students, after all, you know, they're vulnerable. They think that sounds like a great idea. So you want to talk to your children early on about the importance of giving you the educational rights and keeping them.
He had until this person came in.
You know, rights are rights. Rights are rights. You can't take them away for no good reason. So that's why you're getting the conservatorship. So you'll have to show that you know, this youngster can't make good decisions on his own. You see, but rights are rights. Any other questions? I always feel so bad when I talk to people about this topic. But I mean, I'm trying to impress on you how important it is. And if you just remember that donut idea, that's where you're going. That's where you're going. We got one more question. I think we have to stop.
If you pretty much could do anything, like your utopia, without budgets, without all of this, what would you envision?
Well, first of all, I'd envision these services that really prepare kids for work. But secondly, you need support from the other side, from government subsidy to the employer. You know? Or some parents have bought their own business. You need to control the employment situation, see? You could buy a dry cleaning business. buy a donut business. You know, there you'd have control. But, you know, the reality is it is what it is. It is what it is. Okay? On that happy note.
The UC Davis Mind Institute began in 1998 with a promise to find cures for neurodevelopmental disorders. Every day, our physicians and researchers come closer to fulfilling that promise. Their groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, learning disabilities, and other brain disorders is helping children achieve their fullest potential. Please call or visit our website to find out more about current studies, our research team, and upcoming events.